conversations around the effectiveness of the African Union are under the spotlight yet again as the continent commemorates the 60th anniversary of the formation of that body. Let's get you some analysis this morning. We're joined by Dr. Adeoye Akinola. He's from the University of Johannesburg's Institute for Pan-African Thought. Dr. Akinola, I should say, it's great to see you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on to the program. Several issues come to mind, right, when we talk about the African Union, and perhaps it's sharply in focus because of Africa Month celebrated just this past week. Sudan and the conflict there is one of those stories that question the effectiveness of this body. Plenty of analysis saying that the U.S. was once again leading the global response on the violence in Sudan and questioning where the AU even was.
It is exceedingly pathetic, and one has to be, at this point in time, be exceedingly pessimistic that over and over, African Union, or let me say African regional actors and even national leaders, has succumbed their security architecture to external powers. Of course, if we look back at where Africa is coming from, we keep talking about this dependency syndrome and the hegemony of the Western powers in Africa. And despite that, we can talk about the African solutions to African problems, but what we have seen in reality is that Africans have failed to protect their territorial integrity, and they have invited or they have succumbed that sovereignty, that authority to external powers. I know that the AU has tried, of course, to mediate in the conflict, but whatever they have put in place have been ineffective, and that's why we have seen external powers coming into this space to mediate in Sudan.
What do you mean by that, Doc, when you say succumbed to external powers?
Yeah, thank you. If we look at the history of Africa, particularly post-independence history, even with the launch of the African Organization of African Unity and even the AU, what we knew before were many multiplicity of powers in Africa taking responsibility in protecting both their own territorial integrity and that of their neighboring countries. For instance, in West Africa, we have Nigeria acting effectively to police West Africa. And the expectation is that countries like South Africa should be able to do that in SADC. But what we have seen was that, for instance, a country like Nigeria that have actually reduced its external behavior in its region, allowing all kinds of external powers to come into this space and begin to take charge of security and conflict in West Africa and the Sahel particularly. Not only the United States, we have countries like China, like Russia, like Turkey, like France taking a very effective position in terms of conflict in Africa. We even have NATO. We remember the case of Libya. We remember the case of Cote d'Ivoire when President Gbagbo was removed. We have this multiplicity of interests playing out in Africa, and this is due to the failures of Africa's major powers to take responsibilities and protect Africa. Not only the AU, but many national governments has also failed from performing their responsibility because they tend to call themselves big powers in Africa.
So in an ideal world, and perhaps when the Organization of African Unity was first formed all those decades ago, what would have been the aim of how this body would have responded to the myriad of challenges facing the continent at the moment?
I know that some of the time we believe that the expectation was that the African Union will perform more and close the gap that the OAU failed to actually close, leading to the formation of the AU in 2002. But if we remember the liberation movements across Africa and how the OAU have actually mobilized their members to respond to the minority rule in South Africa, for instance, in Mozambique, Mozambique, the OAU was exceedingly effective in trying to liberate many of the African countries from colonialism. But what we have seen today is that the African Union have been relatively on the back seat when it comes to mediating in conflict. Not that they do not mediate, but most of the time we have seen the external powers becoming more effective than the African Union, for instance. But we must also understand that the contexts are different. It's different to be fighting against colonial powers in the territory. It's different from reconciling conflict. Most of these conflicts are internal. Some of them are civil wars. But I strongly believe that the OAU would have performed more in terms of reconciling those conflicts, because they have this internal mechanism. Maybe they use the Council of what we call the Council of the Wise, where people do mediation, diplomacy beyond even violent confrontation in terms of peacekeeping. I believe the OAU will have been in a better position to actually mediate in some of these conflicts.
Yeah, because at sort of best, this is being described as a boys' club at the moment, isn't it? There certainly isn't a point that we've arrived at where we are actually holding each other accountable in the true sense of the word.
We have to understand the limitations of the African Union also, but what people have accused them of is this same comradeship, that the same political elites that have failed in their respective countries are still the same people making important decisions at the level of the African Union. We must know the African Union is still not a supranational organization that has authority over their member states. So they just rely on willpower. So there's really little they can do in terms of coercing some of those political acts to respond even to the wish of the African Union. It's different from what we have in the European Union, which the EU is a supranational organization and their laws are relatively binding. That's not what we have in Africa. We don't even have an African Union standby force able to mediate or to engage in peacekeeping. So they rely on countries to contribute. And the truth is just that the strength of the African Union also depends on the strength of the member states that made up even the African Union. So people can say they are just backing dogs that cannot bite. Of course, one could also resonate with that and understand that even if when they impose sanctions, the political elites do not care if they impose sanctions, as we have seen in Mali, in Burkina Faso, because it is the average people on the street that suffer the brunt of those sanctions. The military are not deterred, and that's why we have this proliferation of coups, particularly in the Sahel.
Prof, let me thank you for your time this morning, or Dr. Adeoye Akinola. Let me thank you for weighing in on what is an incredibly important discussion.